it seems really important that we make sure that we have the types of people on our team doing the types of work necessary to maintain our lead against a regime like the CCP. To argue against myself, the one thing that, while Elon is definitely an original, and that is much more like Steve Jobs, and Steve Jobs was a bit of an asshole, and Elon can definitely be a bit of an asshole. So I think in those ways, maybe they're also similar. But one of the areas where Elon stands out from Steve in a not necessarily positive way as far as public perception is concerned, perhaps it is a positive thing for his ability to be effective, but that's just the love of and thriving in the chaos. And, what Walter Isaacson has talked about as demon mode, I think that characteristic has very high utility for Elon. And it is something that definitely allows him to get stuff done. But it also makes this whole thing a little bit more volatile, because I think he kind of likes it when he's at least a little bit hated. And so I think that will blunt the impact of him being an original in some regards. Because I think he's going to stir the pot and be a little bit more of a troll. He's going to troll humanity while trying to do what he believes is best for humanity the whole time. I think that was another point that Johnny made earlier.
But some people like that, though.
Some people do.
Joe Rogan talks about it. Like Joe Rogan talks about, like we did that compilation. One of the highlights from that thing we did was like that Bill Gates meme, if you wanted to lose a boner fast. And he was in a room full of comedians, and they loved that. They're like, we need more billionaires dunking on other people. Like, this is great. He said it. He's my favorite billionaire. And the reason why I use Joe Rogan as an example is because he is unequivocally, objectively, the largest podcast in the world with the largest platform. And so he is that because he has garnered this reputation of appealing to the masses. And if you believe that the masses are reasonable people, then reasonable people will likely find what he is doing, right, at the very least interesting, at the very least, like let's say non-damaging, right? But there is a subset of the population that finds some of his actions damaging. But it's always moral. And this is why this whole thing is confusing, because it's always moral outrage, right? It's a subjective outrage. And that's what the Twitter thing has created in a way, is like there is a subset of the political spectrum that deem themselves to be of superior moral authority over Elon, and they can judge how his actions subjectively are good or bad, or his political viewpoints are good or bad. I'm not saying he hasn't made mistakes. He's obviously made mistakes, but oftentimes there are things, and I'm like, come on, like really, you really think that's really that bad? You know what I'm saying? Like the whole discussion around the border, which I know was like a huge thing in the United States, that people were freaking out. It's like, how can you be so racist? And then Biden's like, yeah, close it down. Like, okay, so I guess he was right. Good thing he talked about it, right? I just find that stuff very interesting.
Observation about morals, I feel like, is a really good one. And it just kind of was a light bulb moment for me that Twitter, the purchase of Twitter, was essentially like the modern day equivalent of Martin Luther nailing his 95 Theses to the cathedral doors. That, social media in a lot of ways is the purveyor of cultural values and truth. Like, social media is today what the Catholic Church was in the 1500s. And Elon came in and said, yeah, I think the way that y'all are doing all of this is dumb. And we're going to hit the Etch-a-Sketch button and shake it all up. And that's going to be super uncomfortable for a lot of people. And, I think that moral superiority was a massive part of the pushback that Martin Luther and just, the Protestant Reformation in general received from the Catholic Church. Like, supposedly these are both people that believe roughly the same things-ish. Like the differences are relatively minor in the grand scheme of things. And yet the small differences are so consequential that like we've got to kill each other now over it and plunge Europe into literally hundreds of years worth of violence and wars between Christians over, theological differences. And like I think that is what social media has felt like for a while, was that, hey, if you defect even a little bit from these things that must be true, then we're going to kill you socially. And yeah, like I don't know, it's just kind of a weird correlation to think about. I think as people who would like to believe that we're rational, since we live hundreds of years later than those dumb people from the ancient past. Yeah, it's like, no, we're the same exact things. We're the same people. And we've got some systems that are, at least some of our systems are a lot better than that. Some of them seem like they're the exact same. And yeah, I think that hopefully we can figure out some of that stuff and come to solutions that are much less destructive this time around than they have been in the past.
This whole thing in respects to Elon, X, Twitter, way more people being upset with him than it seemed before, at least way more vocal because of his politics, right? Just the fascinating thing is all of it is a battle of whose morality is more important or better. And morality is emotional. It's an emotional, it's not objective, it's subjective. And the most fervent, like the most passionate people that want to paint it as objective are the most subjective by default, right? And that's why you have different religions. That's why you have different political parties, is because there's a spectrum of what morality, like whose morality is better, right? And it's like, it's just so fascinating. And now you have an engineer, and like an autistic engineer, saying, this is how you do it. It's amazing. And the reason why I say autistic engineer is because people on the spectrum typically, I shouldn't say typically, probably almost always, they're not as concerned or perhaps cognizant of how that spectrum could influence someone's actions or someone's reactions to something that's in front of them, right? So you have somebody who's not really worried about that, trying to execute against the thing that is very much in that playing field. And now you have this murky thing where people are like, oh no, this guy totally is a piece of shit because he's obviously a terrible person because he thinks he thinks there's an illegal invasion. I'm not saying yes or no. I'm not saying I'm just saying like just that existing is going to create that chaos. And people that are investors get really uncomfortable because they're like, oh my God, here you go, steering the pot. You're going to have a lot of people that are pissed off at you. They're not going to buy your products, But clearly hasn't been the case because the best-selling car in the world in 2023 was a Tesla.
And the best-selling EV in China for the first half of this year, also Tesla Model Y, which is, the biggest, most consequential car market in the world, whatever that's worth.
Nothing to those people, Hans. Nothing.
In the context of all that, one of the things that is, I think, becoming increasingly, as Elon's influence grows and his ability to continue to execute on new technologies maintains its trajectory, that he sets impossible goals, he creates incredible teams, he executes on those impossible goals always later than expected, almost, with very, very few exceptions, either later or much later than originally hoped for. That person right now is leading the charge on 3 sets of technologies already. This doesn't even get into robotaxis. This doesn't even get into Optimus robots. Space technology was SpaceX, bringing the cost of space travel down by orders of magnitude. EVs and artificial intelligence. That even if you say his contributions with XAI are, limited and inconsequential compared to other players. The fact that he was a co-founder of OpenAI and they are where they are today on the back of his capital and vision, his foresight in this field. Like if you just go back and listen to the things he was saying about artificial intelligence in 2010, this person has understood where this was going long before other people and had thought about it at levels that other people had not. So anyways, these three technologies, these are three of the technology positions that are left that the United States actually has a leadership role in compared to China. That in so many other areas, China is handing us our butts. We talked about this with Michael Dunn. Their supply chains are deeper. Their manufacturing prowess is better. And their workforce is more conscientious. And these things are foundational elements of military might. And if we want to maintain our military edge against a regime that is a socialist dictatorship that does not have any qualms with using any and all means available to the government to squash dissent, it seems really important that we make sure that we have the types of people on our team doing the types of work necessary to maintain our lead against a regime like the CCP. I don't know that I would say that the CCP is evil.
You don't think they're evil?
I don't know. I would say that practically they have been an incredible force for good in the lives of much of the world. That commercializing access to technology and forcing the costs of things down and providing a much larger portion of the population than just fancy rich people who live in big cities and have fat paychecks. I think that is a profoundly positive thing. I think that they, more than any other regime, have contributed positively to that over the last few decades. Now, they are definitely totalitarian and, would never defend their actions toward the Uyghurs or, any number of humanitarian violations that they have enacted. But if I say that, all those things are true and I look at the United States, I would say that we are also equally as guilty of unjustified violence against people. It's just that instead of those people being inside of our country, we only do that to people outside of our country for the most part.
Facts.
And so, I don't think any government is going to, what is a government? A government is a corporation in the limit with a monopoly on violence. If you have a monopoly on violence, you have blood on your hands, period, end of story. Every single government around the world, across every age of history, for all time, is always going to be guilty on this front. So, but would I want to live in China? No. I think that there's a competition that is set up between the ideas of the West and the ideas of the East right now that could be beneficial, could continue. It has been beneficial for humanity as a whole. And it's maintained its healthiness because it is in dynamic tension with the West and with the ideas of the West. And I think as long as the West is healthy, I think that the CCP can continue to provide net benefits to the world. I think if we lose our vitality and we lose our competitiveness against them, so this is not like the West needs to defeat and destroy China because they're evil. What I'm contending is that the West needs to be strong and healthy to help maintain dynamic tension and, going back to the original points we were making earlier today, checks and balances. And I think that the CCP is a positive check and balance against, honestly, the US was becoming pretty friggin' unhinged and crazy and diabolical over the last few decades. And part of that ability was the fact that we were unchecked as global powers. And, if we look back with objective eyes at the actions that we took in the Middle East from the 70s onwards, it's pretty hard to defend our actions as anything other than self-serving and just like a new version of imperialism. And while I don't agree with most of the crazy rhetoric that says we just need to tear America down because we're this evil country, I would say that there's some seeds of truthful critique in their points on this front.